and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome to this week's episode of Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs. I'm Jamie Franklin, and I'm joined once again by Daniel French. Daniel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Jamie. It's deep and crisp and even outside. It's my son's 17th birthday. How time passes, really. It seems no time at all since we were holding him as a little baby. And now
since your wife was in agony.
Thrashing away into the rugby pitches and doing A-levels and what have you. Getting L plates and driving test books and things for birthdays.
What's your son's name, Daniel?
Nathaniel.
Nathaniel, a happy.
I remember when we told friends and family that this is his name, he was that there was some bemusement, But I like these old Hebrew names, actually. I think, well, there I am, Daniel, and he's Nathaniel, and Nathaniel means a gift from God. So,
lovely.
Born on the 8th of December, when we celebrate the conception of the Virgin Mary. So it was
very precise.
Pleased my Catholic in-laws.
Nathaniel
to take biblical names for their children.
Nathaniel, he appears in the first chapter of the book of John, doesn't he?
He does.
That interesting exchange at the beginning, which ends with the thing about the angels ascending and descending. Something I was going to say to that. To explain that little in joke you made there, in the Roman Catholic Church today, the 8th of December, when we're recording this, is Wednesday, is the feast of the Immaculate Conception, isn't it? But in the Church of England, it's been redubbed the Conception of the Virgin Mary, which I think is quite funny.
Take the immaculate bit out.
Yeah, so it may be immaculate, maybe not. Who knows? No, not really sure. And of course,
Synod could decide on that one.
I'm not really sure. I mean, if Duns Scotus and Thomas Aquinas couldn't decide, I'm not sure that the General Synod of the Church of England is going to have much of a chance, to be honest. But let's not go too far. Daniel, you mentioned
important things like net zero by 2030 to worry about anyway. Yeah,
exactly. Much more important things. Speaking of which, Daniel, it is rather cold, and I had this thing at the beginning. I say, let's not just say, it's the weather's okay or the weather's, but it seems like the weather is one of the top stories really in our lives nowadays. I was very amused this week when I saw on the Telegraph website that the Met Office have apparently warned people that it's going to be cold, and they've issued some really just so helpful advice. Let's just read this out, just for people, in case you're wondering, what to do. What do I do if it's cold? I mean, we all think that, don't we? We feel cold and we think, oh goodness me, I just have no idea what I'm supposed to do now. Should I sit here and freeze? Well, no, don't do that. If you must go out, this is great. I love this. If you must go out, dress warmly and wear non-slip shoes. So don't wear, slippers. And tell someone where you're going and when you will get back. Now, I found that slightly perplexing advice, the last bit, because I don't really know what the point of that. So I say to my wife, I tell her when I'm going out all the time anyway. I think that's pretty normal, to be honest. I just walk out of the house and say, see ya.
You might from time to time,
But maybe if she's not there for a long period, but I think it's quite normal, isn't it? If you live with someone, you always say, oh, bye. You don't just walk out the house. Anyway, but why when it's cold?
I don't know. You haven't got teenagers yet.
No, that's true. But is it so that if I say, all right, bye, I'm going to the co-op now, and then I don't come back, that she'll know where my frozen cadaver will be, and so she can inform the authorities and say, oh, my husband went out. He told me he was going to the co-op. I understand it's very cold. He hasn't come back. So he's probably frozen to death somewhere between, our house and the co-op. I'm not really sure. It's just quite a funny piece of advice. Other advice, keep active, dress warmly, eat warm food, and take warm drinks regularly, because it's going to be cold. I would say it is cold, Daniel, but it's it's not that cold. I've got a plug-in radiator in my office because it's not heated, and I'm pretty toasty in here. There are some excellent comments. It makes me really happy reading. So I just got a reminder on my computer.
The thing is, we might in case we forget to tell someone, I'm sure that some clever bod in the government will come up with an app that will track us.
Oh, yes.
It'll always be visible.
Exactly.
And it'll have no other consequences than that.
No.
Because remember, until everybody is safe, nobody.
And that goes for the cold weather as well. So let me read some of these comments out. Please, it always makes me laugh. I always feel encouraged reading the comments on the Daily Telegraph. On some articles, they just inexplicably don't have them. Sally says, please remind me, does that mean I should wear hat, gloves and scarf when outside next week? Also, I only own a pair of Wellington boots and woolen socks. Do these count as non-slip shoes, or should I buy a pair of thermal lined snow boots just in case? OMG, help! It's very good. Some others here. The Met Office has issued its first cold weather warning of the winter. This must be due to global warming. Another one. Next week, bottom wiping for beginners.
Well, there was one on the tube when I was in London yesterday that said, if you're carrying luggage, please hold the handrail in case it's... It'll be put one foot after the other to create locomotion in your body.
Oh my goodness me! It's so...
That could be a whole government department.
Yeah. Well, it is. There's somebody's written a post here, and they've I mean, they must have taken a while doing this, but they've given links to the government official guidance on what to eat for breakfast, when to de-ice your drive, how far you should sit away from your computer, and then he asks what color should my jumper be when I go outside. So there is yeah, it is. I mean, it's a serious point, Daniel. I was thinking about this before the show because I was trying to think, what sort of insightful thing could we say about this? There is something about a sort of post-religious sensibility, isn't there? When you don't have God, you need. It's almost like, it reminds me of the the imagery in Scripture that talks about human beings like sheep. We are like sheep. We do need guidance. We do need some sort of ultimate source of authority to help us order our lives. And I think when we don't have God to guide us and be our shepherd, it's almost like the state's quite an easy substitute. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely.
So,
keep Auntie busy. And as Brits, we are now living in the Hades that we so desired, endlessly talking about the weather. Yeah,
exactly. Well, it's ultimately like a fulfillment of what we really want as Brits, isn't it? I saw a video of an Australian politician criticizing this week, criticizing the sensibility this week, and he was going, "Govern me harder, Daddy. Govern me harder." And I think that sort of it was very, very emphatic. The other thing, which the other sort of slightly amusing piece of humorous news. I mean, look, let's say it's not actually humorous for people who are going to struggle to heat their homes and are going to be very uncomfortable because of the cold weather, and it's obviously much more of a serious health risk than the warm days we had in the summer. So that's not funny. I just was making light of the nanny state style advice. The other, I think, unambiguously funny piece of news is that Matt Hancock has decided to quit the Commons in order to focus on communicating with the public even better than he has been, because he's obviously been doing it really well, in his time as an MP and on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, which apparently he finished third in that. I'd never actually, funnily enough, I never got around to watching it, but apparently he finished third. After a dozen years of trying, this is in The Spectator, after a dozen years of trying and failing to become Prime Minister, Matt Hancock has today announced he's quitting Parliament and will stand down at the next election, just 24 hours after launching his pandemic diaries. Only 9 days ago, his spokesman was furiously insisting to reporters that Hancock had no intention of standing down or stepping away from politics. But now the Lothario legislator suggests that his recent experiences on I'm a Celebrity have changed his views on politics, musing in his farewell letter to Rishi that there was a time when I thought the only way to influence the public debate was in Parliament, but that now I've realised there's that must be a typo. I've realised there's far more to it than that. As a minor media celebrity, perhaps, Steerpike says. So there's a bit of a statement here. It's Hancock. I've increasingly come to believe that for a healthy democracy, we must find new ways to reach people, especially those who are disengaged with politics. The revival of modern conservatism over the next decade will, I suspect, take place as much outside Parliament as in it. For my part, I want to do things differently. I've discovered a whole new world of possibilities, which I'm excited to explore, new ways for me to communicate with people of all ages and backgrounds. I look forward to championing the issues that are dear to my heart, including better support for dyslexic children who get a raw deal from the education system. So I just find it remarkable that
wonderful quote from St. Teresa of Avila: "Oh, for people to see, oh, to be able to see myself as others do."
Yeah.
And what was it about the fact that he was being asked to do so many bush trucker trials that somehow didn't quite get to him? People might have had a slight antipathy to him.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the other thing is, having looked at the diaries, what's astonishing about it is clearly there's someone here who never did anything wrong, who never put a foot out in government, who was always the victim of other people's incompetence or machinations. I mean, surely he should stay if he's that good, according to the diaries. But, maybe we could put it to public vote as to what use do we have with Matt Hancock?
Hancock.
How could we use all those gifts and talents? And I think, I don't know, governor of Antarctica.
It boggles the mind the opportunities which there are now that he's thrown off the straitjacket of being an elected representative. It's interesting that he sees himself as a herald of the revival of modern conservatism. I find that he's not the first name I think of when I think of who's going to bring about the sort of intellectual rejuvenation of the conservative political philosophy. But maybe I'm wrong, Daniel. Maybe somehow he will really be I don't know, spearhead that. I have to say I've not really been convinced that Hancock understands what conservatism is, even though he's been a Conservative MP. For example, locking the entire country down for as many months as he possibly could and destroying.
That wasn't his fault, you see.
No, it wasn't his fault, but he did support it, didn't he? And he sort of thought that was a good thing to do. So it's just hard for me to see how that sort of tallies with the enthusiasm with which he was championing it. It's hard for me to see how that actually tallies with any kind of conservative political philosophy. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm wrong. Like that time, when we were all in lockdown, and he said, "Now, when you go out for exercise, make sure it's once a day. And if you don't, we'll just stop you from coming out of your house at all. Problem solved." So there we are. Modern,
spoken like a true Democrat. Deeply connected to the constitutions of our country.
Yeah, indeed. The future of modern conservatism.
Sorry. Oh, did I? Whoops. Did I just say that? My goodness.
The future of modern conservatism is safe because Matt Hancock is going to devote himself to its promotion outside of Parliament. So will Matt Hancock's star continue to rise, or will he slip into complete as opposed to relative obscurity? I don't know. I guess that's for our listeners to decide, really, isn't it? So
when is Elon Musk starting these trips to Mars? Because I think we could have a vote who we want to go on it. Have you ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? I think the B arc. I've got a neighbour, I haven't quite figured it out, who's got the number plate B arc. Remember that there's a planet that sends all its undesirables, mostly who've worked in the bureaucratic blob, telling them it's the end of the world. They put them on these Elon Musk-like rockets to another planet, and they have their own little sort of rather useless civilization elsewhere to everyone else's relief. And I do think, Mars could be an option, really.
Or he could revive modern conservatism on another planet. He could take it interstellar, couldn't he? I think that's a good idea. Daniel, I don't know whether you I don't know whether you've noticed, Daniel, but I've got a I've got a cut on my forehead, and I just wanted to reassure people that I haven't been involved in any sort of violent.
You weren't wearing the right shoes, were you? Come
Yeah,
on,
no, I was.
slipped.
I went outside just wearing a pair of socks in the icy weather, and I slipped. No, what happened was I was just leaning down to my fridge, and I stood up and hit my head on a spice rack. So it was quite painful actually, and I cursed the spice rack, and I had to repent of that because it wasn't a moment of it wasn't.
You got a bit doolally during this week.
Yeah. It wasn't a moment of exemplary self-control, I have to be honest. But the good thing is, as I noticed, my Irreverend cap, which I'll put on now, actually covers up the wound quite nicely. So I'll put that on, and that can be a nice
segue into the merch.
Yeah, well, I was going to say this could be a nice reminder that the merchandise is available. Now, Johanna, our merchandise person, she's sort of not really available for a few days. So merchandise orders might take a little bit longer to get to people, but if you order, she'll communicate with you and tell you what those are. Also, there are things like, postal strikes and all this kind of stuff, which may affect, but we do have our brilliant hats, our mugs, which are selling very well, actually, these mugs. People love these mugs. And
yes.
The great...
Get one for your parish priest. Yea, even your bishop.
Yeah, exactly. You can give them away to people like Emily, who listens. She's been amazing ordering. She's ordered something like 9 mugs, and she's given them to clergy and all sorts of stuff. We get a little business card in there as well, so people, will know. You can leave the business card in the mug, and people will know where to find the website and all this kind of stuff. So you can do that. Also, great t-shirts as well with Jonathan's, our graphic designer's fantastic artwork on the back. So do go to our website irreverendpod.com, and you can find.
They're really warm, actually. My wife's wearing. Actually, it's a lovely undershirt. Really, it's really cozy.
Yeah, they're long sleeve. They're unisex, so they're either you can get them if you're a man or a woman, and they're really nice quality. So just go to revpod.com and click on merch, and you can find the merchandise there. Right, Daniel, let's do some. We'll continue with our reading in the Sermon on the Mount, shall we? Let's say the Lord's Prayer together. We invite all listeners and viewers, if you'd like to pray with us. This always say this in church. If you would like to pray, please feel free now. If you would not like to pray, there is no compulsion. So that goes for our listeners as well. There's no compulsion here, but we're going to pray the Lord's Prayer. So let's pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So we're in Matthew chapter 7. We've been reading through the Sermon on the Mount. And for people who don't listen to the show, before we go into our sort of main, more weighty stories, we always do a little Bible reading first. So we've been reading through the Sermon on the Mount. And today we get to chapter 7, verse 15. So here we go. These are the words of Christ. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns or figs from thistles? So every sound tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears evil fruit. A sound tree cannot bear evil fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. I think we will read the next bit, actually. We'll just read the next little bit because it does go with this. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you evildoers. So that was Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 to 23. And it's quite a challenging passage, isn't it, Daniel? It starts with this thing about beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves, which is obviously where we get that saying, a wolf in sheepskin clothing. I always get that mixed up in my mind. So sheep in wolfskin clothing, which would be strange. But I guess the kind of the exhortation here is to be discerning, isn't it? To be spiritually discerning about the fact that there are people who clearly take the name of Christ, but they don't bear the kind of fruit that honors Christ and that God is looking for. And there's a sort of, in some ways, there's a sort of quite straightforward test, which is that you look at the fruit that somebody's life is bringing about, and if that fruit is good, and it seems like it's from God, it's more likely that their profession is genuine, and if not, it could be the case that that person is a false prophet.
I think it's one of the insights of Matthew's gospel, isn't it? He's really particular about how church dynamics work, spiritual communities. He's the only evangelist who actually uses the word church within his text. I think Luke, Mark, and John don't actually employ that word. And you can imagine, can't you, first century communities coming together and people electing themselves as prophets, seers, overseers within communities who really aren't fit for the job, or who are very malign and wicked. That they, in starting this new venture of Christianity, they had this steep learning curve, and I bet there was a whole host of Looney Tunes trying to take these congregations that are already under great stress in all sorts of weird and wonderful directions. And often, into things like a return to paganism or a return to a strict Judaism.
Yeah. There's also this, I mean, this passage is it sort of lends itself more to the sort of Protestant notion of the invisible church, doesn't it? That there's a visible church which consists of sort of everybody who's part of it, but then there's an invisible church which is the community of genuine believers who are truly the followers of Christ and Christ's disciples within the visible church. And I think as Anglicans we have to, if we're going to be consistent, I think we have to hold those two things together. I think there clearly is a visible church, which is genuinely the church of God, but then there is faith. Well, let's put it this way: there is genuine faithfulness and unfaithfulness within the visible institution, and I think that's something which is clearly the implication of what Christ is saying here. False prophets are not presumably people outside of the church, they're people within the church. So even within the church, we do need to be discerning. I think there's an interesting bit. If you look at verses 21 to 23 quite carefully, they say, so it starts with, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who's in heaven. So it's not about just saying things, it's actually about doing the will of the Father. But then the people say, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? So they're actually appealing to their works through their words. So they're saying, we have been doing things, we've been doing your will. And then he says, and then I will I declare to them. Again, it's an extremely high Christology, as they say in more academic circles. Christ himself will judge these people. I never knew you. Depart from me, you evildoers. So it's like, I suppose the question is, what's going on there? Because he says it's about doing my will, and they're saying, well, we've done your will. And then he says, well, you will depart from me anyway. I never knew you. You are evildoers. So I suppose it's, well, I don't know. When they say, did we not do X, Y, and Z? I suppose the question must be whether they actually did do those things, or whether they're just saying they did those things. So I think that's kind of an important distinction here, isn't it? Between.
So for Christians, what the passage is inviting us to consider is that in discerning, who is a good Christian leader, or who is an authentic voice, it's not just about things that are on the surface. We have to have a discerning spirit, and as individuals in the community, really, really be able to dig deep into what is that person who is shepherding us, what is going on in their lives at a spiritual level. Because it strikes me, to begin with, it's the obvious, that that the power crazed can be. Most people can pick that up, but then there can be much more subtle false prophecy.
Yeah, I think that's true. So, Daniel, while we're talking about the church, shall we just mention one of the stories that we have this week, which is about the and we will, just so people know, we're going to talk about some other stuff coming up, like these well, I don't really know what to call them, the trial climate lockdowns in Oxford, and the fact that COVID jabs have now been they have been approved for babies. We're going to talk about that soon as well. But let's just say a word about this thing about the Church of England have they've released their mission statistics, and the Church Times headline is that the Church of England mission statistics record, quote, another anomalous year. Shall I just read some of this? The devastating effect of the pandemic on church attendance is apparent in new figures for 2021 released by the C of E's data analysis team on Tuesday. Although weekly in-person attendance at service were up more than 1/3 from 2020 levels, they remain almost 1/3 lower than pre-pandemic levels. I mean, that's so. Just take a moment to take stock of that. So, weekly in-person attendance at services were up more than 1/3 from 2020 levels. That's when we couldn't leave our homes, but they still remain 1/3 lower than pre-pandemic levels, which means that they're 1/3 lower than they were in 2019, which is pretty shocking, isn't it? I mean, I suppose the effects of all the lockdowns and everything are still sort of lingering, but in terms of giving you an idea of the significant damage that this has done in terms of church attendance, is quite shocking. So these are the breakdown. In 2021, almost all churches offered in-person services, it says. So, all the churches were open and functioning again in 2021. The average all-age weekly attendance, which includes Sundays and midweek services, was 605,000 people, compared with 345,000 people in 2020, which is the year of COVID. But in 2019, it was 854,000 people. So that means that we've lost 240,000 worshippers since 2019. So in between 2019 and now, with the pandemic, in inverted commas, in between, we've lost 250,000 people. I mean, it's absolutely, it's devastating, isn't it? What's your thoughts, Daniel?
Well, we told you so.
Yeah, I mean,
what else can I say? Those of us in March 2020 who wanted to put the brakes on these kind of decisions and this enthusiasm for going beyond the legislation, said this is going to have dire consequences for the church, that this would snap out a mass of people from the habit of church going. What can we say? I mean, it's heart rendering, and there definitely has been a drop in that. I think a lot of town congregations that probably would have been around about 50-60 people in 2019 coming to church are now in the 30s, and you can see it when you go in. I saw it in one of my congregations, and it's taken quite an enormous amount of effort on my part and the teams to build up. And even then, I don't think we're quite back where we were. I think the whole COVID thing scared the willies off a load of people, and the church fed into that message rather than saying, take courage, we have a supernatural faith, and that worship is worth it. But instead we pandered to a secular message. And in some ways I'm more angry about that, actually, than even locking churches, that we pandered to the COVID narrative, and we didn't give an alternative. We didn't pierce the cloud base of fear. And this is what you get. This is a third of our worshipping membership gone.
Yep.
And and some of these are now more frail, more elderly people who are going to be very hard to hook in. If you looked further down that report as well, did you notice what it said about children's work?
No, tell me.
That youth and children's work again has been massively hit, and that again is an anecdotal story. I think particularly in the countryside, if you tell a congregation enough that over let's say 18 months, that social distancing is a requirement to keeping us all safe, then when you try and have young people come to church, they're going to pick up that their elders see them as COVID bombs. And you're going to end up with youth work being decimated, which I think it has. I think it genuinely has been, and I believe that there's some stats elsewhere to show that the employment of youth workers, family workers, and so on is catastrophically down.
Yep.
So what we should have had is a message that said we've got to do everything to get these young people who are going through a mental hell. We as the elders have got to take the risk and the risk of getting COVID for their mental health, because they are our future and they are worth it. In fact, they're not only the church's future, they are our present.
Yep.
And since they have not seen that bravery for us, why should they bother coming?
Yep. I know. Yep, I agree.
And you can see we had months and months and months where church was essentially, on YouTube or live stream. In one sense, I've got nothing wrong with that. I did that. I did a lot of that. It appealed to my techie sensibilities. But if you've got kids who are spending the whole week in front of Microsoft Teams and Zooms, the last thing they want to do is watch the vicar's YouTube favorites on a Sunday morning with 50, 60 octogenarians.
Yep.
So that was a massive miscalculation. But
I think, Daniel,
I don't know how we recover from this without taking a radically different approach. And I look at the Christmas, there's the Church of England National Christmas Appeal, which is trying to scratch under the surface that we're all possibly going to have a bit of a blue Christmas, and come to church because somehow in singing carols and coming into nice Christmas services, that's going to make you feel better. Well, maybe it will, but I don't think that's the kind of dynamic message that we need to be putting on now.
No, it's a low energy. It's like an energy sucking message, isn't it? So it's an energy hoover.
Please come in because we're doing nice things and that might make you feel a bit better. And I just want to bang my head against the wall. We should be at DEFCON 1 and we're at DEFCON 5 and there isn't a DEFCON 5. The whole bureaucratic blob of the organization is in its perpetual it's in this sort of perpetual introverted energy loop, where it thinks that the way to save this problem is just to chuck more money on employing more desk jobbers and special ministries. And it's not what we need at the moment,
Yeah, Daniel, can I just draw our attention to this bit at the end of the article here, where it says, so this is the kind of official kind of reading of this situation. The effects of the pandemic were, quote, far from over in 2021, the author of the report, Dr. Ken Eames, writes, quote from him, "It would be very surprising, therefore, if Church of England attendance and participation in 2021 returned to their pre-pandemic levels. This report should be treated as a summary of another anomalous year," he advises, indicating the extent to which things have, quote, bounced back, but noting that further bouncing back is expected. It's a resonance with Alan Partridge there. For anyone who's a fan of his autobiographical work, Bouncing Back. The Archbishop of York said, quote, 2021 was a really challenging year with some COVID restrictions still in place. Also, many people reluctant to join public gatherings even by the end of the year. It is really heartening to see that in spite of this, there was a sharp rise in the number of people attending church services. I mean, I have to say that last part is the reason there was a sharp rise is because people were literally locked in their houses in 2020. It's not that surprising that there's been a sharp rise, because there's been a sharp rise in all outside activity in 2021, because it's like we weren't locked in our houses in the same way. And to describe it as an anomalous year, and to say that, you know, further bouncing back is expected. Well, I think the proof will be in the pudding, won't it? But the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. But if you look at the graph, you know, we're talking about a third of the people of a third of our worshipping members not being there in 2021. I don't really see any reason to believe that a significant amount of those will come back in 2022 who didn't come back in 2021. So I'm going to guess that the downward trend will actually continue. I think it's going to get worse, and that it won't come up at all. That would be my guess, or at least it will stay steady. But even if it stays steady, or even if it rises slightly, say it rises by 10-20%, it's still an absolute disaster. And I think, you know, all I'm saying is,
had we kept our churches open, and were encouraged, allowed to present these spaces as essential sacred spaces, with communities that are offering supernatural sacramental ministries that are life-changing in a time of national peril, then perhaps we wouldn't have the number of people, when it comes to the census as well, saying, well, am I a Christian or not? What did they ever do for me in the last few years?
Yeah, I agree with that, Daniel. I just think that really my desire is that we face up to the reality of what's happened, and not try and make out, as I really do think that these comments do, that there's sort of nothing to see here. I mean, this is a total disaster. And you know, we were told as well that, you know, online church would serve as a sort of not only an adequate substitute, but it would actually reach more people and bring more people in. But that's, the statistics just do not, you know, this is cold, hard mathematics here. This does not bear out what we were told. There were 850.
I mean, let's just have a look at the Church of England live services, because if that was the case,
when I mean, it almost, in a sense, it almost doesn't matter, does it? Because surely nobody's going to say that watching a service online is the equivalent to actually being a regular member of a worshiping.
Exactly. Could we look at the Church of England service? Advent 1 watched by 2.8k people.
It's not that impressive, is it?
That's not a sustainable response.
No, it's not any kind of response. And the thing is, Daniel, is I mean, I think it's so important to say this, is, you know, for people who are, you know, in positions of authority and influence in the church, just acknowledge what's happened. 854,000 down to 605,000. That is a catastrophic drop in the amount of people. And if that number doesn't rise significantly, which I think is, to be honest, I do think it's unlikely. I don't really see why you would think it would. But say it rose by 20%. that would still only get you back up to 720,000 people. So you'd still be 130,000 people down. And, we're talking about, it's not like we've got millions of people in our churches. We've got less, significantly less than 1 million people, just over 500,000 people. So you can't afford to lose 250,000 people if that doesn't come up, or if it continues to decline. We're in a death spiral in terms of attendance at church. And I think, so firstly, two things, right? I really think we must acknowledge this isn't an anomalous year. The effects of the pandemic are far from over. That's true, but that won't change. I don't really understand that comment. We're discussing the effects of the COVID situation now, and it won't change. These effects will continue because these people have left, and they're not going to come back. If they didn't come back in 2021, why would you think they come back in 2022? It won't happen. So we have to acknowledge that firstly, what's happened, and we have to address the mistake we made, which you're quite right. The mistake we made
it's a theological mistake.
Yeah.
It was the liberal narrative at being allowed to take complete control of the script.
Yeah, it was the complete capitulation to the secular narrative around COVID with no faith. That's just, I mean, sorry, I haven't said that as eloquently as I could have done, but it's the absence of real faith, I think, in our response, real faith to listen to what God was really saying to the churches at the time and to implement it. And I believe that if we'd really done that and showed faith and courage and really fought to keep our churches open and fought to keep our congregations worshipping, fought to keep the sacraments going, the communion of or the fellowship of believers, the teaching and preaching and proclamation of the gospel, other and other activities going as far as we reasonably could have done, I don't think that this would have happened. And I think we could have seen God's blessing on the church, and we could have seen congregations grow. And I have to say as well, Daniel, that in churches which kept themselves open as much as they possibly could,
at the threat, some of them at the threat of arrest.
Yeah. But just in a normal way, like our church, we didn't do anything particularly extreme. We just kept our church open as much as we possibly could. We've grown significantly over the last few years, even with COVID. And I think that would be true for lots of churches that kept themselves going and were as faithful as they possibly could and push back against the pressure to close the church and to cease worshipping God and celebrating the sacraments and preaching the gospel. So that's just, to me, it's just a basic message. It's like you can't just shut the church down and call that faithfulness, because it's at the very least it's much more complicated than that. And I know we've gone over and over this, haven't we? But there was no significant wrestling with that dilemma. It wasn't even treated as a dilemma. It was just treated as obvious that, well, of course the church is what was the phrase they used? Non-essential. Of course the church is less important than supermarkets. Of course the church is less important than off licenses. Of course people shouldn't be going to church because it's too dangerous. But no, that's not right. It's just it's not right. There was no real wrestling with it. There was a response which didn't inspire faith in people. It didn't seem to come from a perspective of it didn't seem to come from a place of real faith and courage. It seemed to come from a place of, well, a desire to be seen to be doing the right thing in the eyes of the world. And I think that desire is really embedded at the heart of the Church of England's hierarchy, I have to say, and it manifests itself in other ways as well. But it's a mistake. And
how interesting that is when we compare to the insights that we've made in our podcast, that clearly since the lockdown, if not before, a significant number of people have come to faith, have had epiphanies, miraculous encounters, that they've gone over intellectual hurdles and have come into a profound faith. And if we are picking up on just a fraction of that, and we're overwhelmed by the thousands who are coming out with these very similar stories, why isn't the Church of England doing the same? There are masses of people out there who are having or had a Christian religious experience, God has knocked on their door, and when they've knocked on the Church of England's door, very sadly, the vicars rolled their eyes.
Yep.
And said, well, we don't really do that anymore, or evangelism, or isn't that a form of colonization?
Yeah.
And they've got from the pulpit a woke tick list,
yeah,
and they don't come. So it's not as if God hasn't actually sent us people. He is sending us people, and we are turning them away because they don't fit our political narrative.
Yeah, it's sad. It's a sad thing for me to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. People often ask me, whether it's via email or comments or whatever, comments on YouTube. They ask me, where shall I go to church? I want to go to church. Where shall I go to church? And honestly, that's quite a hard question for me to answer. I'd love to be able to say, go to your local Church of England parish church, but I just can't. I have to say, try your parish church and see what it's like. But really, what I want for you is I want you to go to a place where your faith will be nurtured and nourished, and where you can grow and learn about a genuine Christian life. I don't want to send you somewhere where you'll be showered with woke epithets and so on. We know exactly what I mean. I don't have to elaborate on that. I don't I've got no interest in sending anyone to a church where that's going to happen, whether that's in a Church of England church or anywhere else. And it's a sadness to me that I have to say that to people. And I'm thinking, Daniel, I'm trying to think, like, how can we make this productive? Like, what would it's easy for us, isn't it, to in a way to sort of say, well, they got it wrong and blah blah blah. And what should the Church of England
appreciate that? From the conversations I've had with people who are much higher up the ladder, that they often have a very hard task, and they're much more constrained than we might imagine in what they can do in action. So
yeah, but the thing is, Daniel, is I think the problem is that the Church of England, it's always the problem with this thing of all the power and resources accruing in the centre, isn't it? Because it's like it aggregates, and then it sort of what's the word? It sort of it exacerbates itself. So we do see all these sort of central initiatives, and honestly, I don't want to dismiss all of it, but really what we need to get back to is just a faithful preaching of the gospel, celebration of the sacraments, and Christian community. We don't need all the folderol and the persiflage and all the added extras. We just need faithfulness to the gospel. And if we had a text for this, I'd go to Acts chapter 2, where people are being baptized. So you have baptisms. After Peter's sermon, Peter preaches the gospel. 3,000 people are baptized. So you've got the sacrament of baptism, you've got conversion, you've got the preaching of the gospel, and then you've got the four marks of the early church, which are breaking of bread, the fellowship of believers, the devoting themselves to the teaching of the apostles, and prayer. Just very, very simple. Attending to the teaching of the apostles in Christ, in the scriptures, prayer, the breaking of bread, and the fellowship of believers, the preaching of the gospel, evangelism, and baptizing new converts. It's not more complicated than that. That's what we're called to do as the church. It's and everything should tend towards, everything should be about those things. All the arrows should be pointing in the same direction. That's what we want to do. We want to evangelize, see people come to Christ, see people grow in their faith, see people baptized, see people admitted to Holy Communion, encourage a vibrant fellowship and community of Christians in our local churches. That's what we should be doing, and is it that complicated?
Here's something that they could do. It'd be very easy. In all those statistics, they could make the measuring stick the number of adult baptisms. And you could have a directive which says to every priest, that is going to be the judgment, in the sense of your community. Really, that's going to be the measure and if you are doing well, we will, intervene to help you to do better. We will, we will ensure that you can have the additional resources. If you are doing poorly, then we will also intervene to see what is happening, and maybe there are particular circumstances or direction. But if we said that actually, instead of all these sort of attendance figures, that was going to be the measure, it was going to be the number of adult Christian initiations in now what people are describing in the press as a post-Christian society, where Christians are now in the statistical minority. That is going to be the yardstick for every institution in the Church of England, for every parish and for every ministry. How many people this year, adults, not children, how many adults have come to faith and have gone into the waters? That for me would cut, because if you look at those figures for baptisms, I think it shows again a particular drop, but it doesn't give you the full figure of how many of those are, because you're getting a sense of where the movement is and the energy. It's going to be with adults, adult conversions, adults being recruited into fellowship in the church, and making that dramatic, wonderful opening to the life of Christ through baptism.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have no measure. Everything, you'd think it would be the most obvious thing, wouldn't it? But, considering at the end of Matthew's Gospel, the Great Commission, and we make no real measurement of it.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. It would certainly sharpen people's focuses, wouldn't it, if you did that? One thing I do say to people, well, I think I will say to people, I think I've only said it to one person so far, but when they say, where should I go to church? I heard it's Paul, is it Paul Northcott, the guy who converted to Eastern Orthodoxy? He's like a sort of environmentalist intellectual. What's his name? Do you know who I'm talking about? He's friends with. Is it Northcott? Is that his name?
So I've just gone blank. It'll come back to me.
Yeah. Anyway, that guy. He's friends with Rod Dreher and Jonathan Pageau and people like that. You'll tell me in a minute. It's not Northcott. Northcott's someone else I know. Anyway, so he. When he was sort of, felt he was being drawn to Christ.
Paul Kingsnorth.
Oh, Kingsnorth. Oh, of course, yeah. Paul Kingsnorth. I heard him saying, when I was being drawn to Christ, I would pray, Lord, send me a priest. And he did. He found this Eastern Orthodox priest, and it led to him joining the Eastern Orthodox Church. So that is a good piece of advice, I think, for people who are thinking, I'd like to go to church. I'm being drawn by God to Jesus Christ. What should I do? Pray for a priest. It's what you need.
And I had a very, very wise priest who mentored me when I was in Scotland, who saw that in my despair of running this tiny urban priority church in this huge housing estate, and how could you possibly grow this church? And he just said to me one day, pray him in.
Yep.
Pray him in. Be on your knees in that church, saying, Lord, send if it is your will, send me people to build up this fellowship.
Yeah. Amen. We should not forget prayer in all of this. It's so central, isn't it? And maybe, I don't know, maybe prayer was left out when we were responding to COVID. Were we really truly seeking in a prayerful way the right path? I'm not really sure we were.
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? Because there have been prayerful initiatives in the Church of England, like the Thy Kingdom Come thing, seem to be on the right kind of track. There have been attempts to reboot that sense that we are going to evangelize people not through management initiatives or better marketing, but actually through the power of God. But somehow that whole message was flattened in March 2020.
Yep. I think also this is a different issue, but I think that phrase "Thy kingdom come" is deeply ambiguous, and I think it needs to be interpreted properly. Otherwise, it can lead you to some quite wrong places. But anyway, that's a separate issue. Daniel, I think we've talked about this a lot. So we should move on. I mean, it is an extremely significant thing, and I think it does in many ways vindicate what people like us have been saying for
this time next year.
Well, this time next year we'll see, won't we? But we'll see. We'll mark this moment, and we'll say, we'll see if things are bouncing back next year, or how much they are. And next year, I don't think there'll be any excuse at all. We will see. Has God blessed our response to COVID, or has He not? At the moment, the statistics are appalling, and the church really needs to face up to it in humility and faith. But I think let's move on. I think we've really only got time for one other story now, so I'd like to talk about this scheme that's going on in Oxford, which I lived just outside of Oxford for a couple of years a while ago, so and I studied there for a bit, so I know the area well, and it's quite, I think it's fair to say it's quite a progressive it's quite a progressive place, let's say, not in a good way. So this is from this is reported on the Daily Sceptic website, but I'm just going to read it out. I don't know whether have you seen this yet, Daniel?
Yeah.
This is quite something. Oxford County Council is going to trial a scheme whereby the residents of the city are divided into 6 zones, with movement by car between the zones restricted to 100 trips per year. Eric Worrell on What's Up With That says this: imagine if your power-mad politicians like COVID lockdown so much they wanted to continue them indefinitely. This is going to be trialled in Oxfordshire in Britain. Oxford County Council passed climate lockdown trial to begin in 2024. Now, to be honest, I don't know where this is quoted from. I think this is maybe quoted from, I don't know. Anyway, let's read this out. Oxford County Council yesterday approved plans to lock residents into one of 6 zones to save the planet from global warming. The latest stage in the 15-minute city agenda is to place electronic gates on key roads in and out of the city, confining residents to their own neighbourhood. Under the new scheme, if residents want to leave their zone, they will need permission from the council, who gets to decide who is worthy of freedom and who isn't. Under the new scheme, residents will be allowed to leave their zone a maximum of 100 days per year. But in order to even gain this, every resident will have to register their car details with the council, who will then track their movements via smart cameras around the city. Oxford County Council, which is run by Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party, secretly decided to divide up the city of Oxford into 16 15-minute districts in 2021, soon after they were elected to office. None of the councillors declared their intention of imprisoning local residents in their manifestos, of course, preferring to make vague claims about how they will improve the environment instead. Every resident will be required to register their car with the county council, who will then monitor how many times they leave the district via number plate recognition cameras. And don't think you can beat the system if you're a 2-car household. Those 2 cars will be counted as one, meaning you will have to divide up the journeys between yourselves. 2 cars, 50 journeys each, 3 cars, 33 journeys each, and so on. Then the Daily Sceptic website then corroborates this story from the Oxford Mail, which basically does corroborate. I mean, obviously it's in slightly less polemical language, but that essentially does corroborate it. As a comment here, this is the Daily Sceptic editorial. Communist states like the Soviet Union and China seem to love movement restrictions and internal passports. This is the same. This isn't the Daily Sceptic editorial. This is Eric Worrell, just to be clear. In my opinion, Britain has been edging closer to naked communism for at least half a century. So I guess it was inevitable that an attempt would be made at some point to introduce Chinese-style movement restrictions on British people. In my opinion, the climate claims are just an excuse, an attempt to deflate criticism of their authoritarianism, and then they make some comments about perhaps the University of Oxford should be up in arms about this restriction on people's freedom in the city, but they're not, surprisingly enough. So I don't really understand exactly the ins and outs of this scheme, but it does seem somewhat worrying. Particularly, I think the thing about the city being divided up into 6 zones
I would call it somewhat worrying and call it horrific.
with what are they going to place in between the zones? Some like barriers. Like it is literally like something out of sort of like East Germany or something like that in the Cold War period.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, when you think about the budgets of the local authorities? Many of them will say, well, we can't afford to collect your bins every week. We've just had an edict come out that we're not going to have garden waste collected anymore unless you pay for it.
You're joking, really?
You have to pay an additional levy to have garden waste picked up. So you can imagine how these hard-strapped councils are now going to spend millions upon millions of pounds putting in this CCTV infrastructure. This is going to need 100 people to employ,
and more, I would have thought. For the whole of Oxford.
The infrastructure, the cameras, the apps, the software, the police. Of course, the police, that we've been told how busy. They're incredibly busy chasing burglars and monitoring our tweets, and now they're going to have to be chasing Fred, who wants to make that is going to make 101th trip to the supermarket because he's run out of milk. He's now become a criminal.
It's shocking, isn't it? I mean, to be honest with you, I would, if I was thinking about moving to Oxford, I would not move there now. I mean, I would just say I'm just never live in Oxford because I don't want to be forced not to run my car for 200 and however many days a year. But Daniel, so interesting thing to me about this is that I think that we've already seen this sort of thing happen in London with the congestion zones and the ULEZ charging, which were what? Sorry.
He's expanding for the whole city.
Yeah. So Sadiq Khan is expanding that for the whole city, which basically means that it basically means it's unaffordable unless you're extremely rich to have a diesel car in London. But it is, all of this kind of stuff. It is about restricting people's ability to move easily, and it's about inconveniencing people, and it is a method of control. Now, one of the things I'd say, before, if people say, well, you're just being sort of paranoid, this is a genuine, this is people's genuine desire to reduce pollution or carbon dioxide emissions and so on. What I'd say to that is, okay, if that is the case, where is the scientific rationale for this scheme? Has anyone actually done any work on it? Like, what are the likely effects of doing this? How much will it reduce people's movements, and how much will it reduce emissions? And is it worth it given the extremely authoritarian measure it is? And I don't think anyone's even thought about that just on a basic level, right? Because I don't agree with this, even if it did reduce pollution. I wouldn't agree with this. But is it even going to reduce pollution? Because surely it will make people drive more because they'll have to drive round zones rather than through them, right? So if you need to get your kids, if you're in zone A and you need to get to zone C, and that's a school, and you have to go there however many times a year, 200 times a year, say, and there's zone B in the middle, that means 100 times a year you're going to have to drive further round zone B. So all this will do is inconvenience people. All it will do is increase the amount of mileage people will do, and increase the amount of time people will spend on the road, and probably increase traffic congestion. So will it, just on a practical level, will it even work? And that's why I think that this is a reflex of control, and the climate agenda is being utilized by authoritarian politicians who can invoke this cause to justify anything, and it is very worrying.
You can see the thread from our podcast today. We started off with these nanny state announcements. Put on a scarf if you're going outside, wear the right shoes. That this necessity to control and for people's desire, some, to be controlled by the big state or to give it over their control is a desire for some to be omniscient and omnipotent, and for others to succumb to it. There's a theological message here. Interesting enough, as you were saying this, I thought, I wonder what that would do in the. I don't know if Oxford is one whole deanery of the Church of England, but imagine if your parish is across zones. Now, the church could take it could take an supplicant view to all of this, and say, "Oh, isn't this good and great that we're doing this in Oxford?" But I suspect it will make actually things like attending church rather hellish. I mean, what if you're down to low numbers in terms of journeys, and you've got to make a choice between receiving Christ on a Sunday at the Eucharist or going to the supermarket? What will the Church of England say is important? Do you know what I mean? This restructuring will have an ecclesiastical effect.
Yep, I agree. I think it's deeply worrying, and also I do think there's an issue of where this is going to lead. Is this going to be rolled out across the country now? Are we going to be banned from leaving our counties a certain amount of days a year, and will that then be tightened up as the narrative grows? I think it's deeply worrying, and I think people should be against this, and they should elect politicians who are against this as well. I've been reading the Steve Koonen's book Unsettled. He's a top US scientist, and he's a Democrat. He was part of the Obama administration, actually, but it's a very, very helpful book on the whole climate change situation. In short, he does believe that humans contribute a little bit to climate change through climate warming, through the emission of CO2, but he thinks it's actually the amount it's actually causing any real change in our environment is minimal and limited. I haven't got through the whole thing, but it's a very, very helpful scientific delineation of the issues around this, and it just shows you like how crazy how so far removed from anything resembling science this kind of thing is. These people have no idea what they're doing. They've got no idea what problem they're trying to address. They've got no idea if what they're doing will even address the problem or how it will ameliorate it or anything like that. It is climate authoritarianism. And I think, we do need to wake up to it. And I agree with you, Daniel. I think the church needs to make a theological response to this. But who knows? I think we'll have to think about it when we'll probably be the ones who end up trying to provide that response. I'm not sure what the response is at the moment.
No, there'll be those in the church who say, "Oh, it doesn't matter if going to church means losing your one of those journeys, then don't come to church because we can do it all on Zoom anyway."
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, exactly. That's the thing, isn't it? That's where all of these authoritarian agendas are pointing, isn't it? To keeping us in our homes and putting us in front of screens. And really, this is a diminishment of human existence, and we can't allow this kind of technocratic, technological, authoritarianism in the name specifically of climate change in this instance, but in the name of other things, notably COVID. We can't allow this to continue in this way. This is horrendous, and people do need to wake up to it, because it's very, very worrying. I think it's possible that in the near future we could wake up in a world where I can't go and visit my family in Essex because I'm not allowed to drive out of my city. I think that's entirely possible, that the government could eventually be looking to exert that amount of control over us in the name of the climate. And the thing about this is it's not like COVID, where they had a rationale for doing it all immediately because it was crisis. Because this is a sort of ongoing nebulous low resolution crisis, this can just ramp up and up and up and up, and it can just get the screw can just be tightened gradually. and before you know it, we could be in that place. So I think it is worth pointing these things out now, and and as I say, voting against people who would do these kind of things, writing to MPs, bringing them to people's attention, and pointing out why they are so very dangerous, and I think also trying to inject some sense into this conversation around climate change, because it's crazy what we're doing.
The bureaucratic blob, of course, as a sort of almost self-perpetuating entity, loves this kind of thing. So it will be very easy to see that hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people will be employed into this professional caste of desk jobbing busybodies, for whom you have to apply to go and see your mother. This kind of Rousseau Kafkaesque blob, rather than actually being productive entrepreneurs, we turn our professional class into busybodies. And actually, the problem is that there's a gravity well on that. Those kind of jobs are quite easy. They're not demanding, but they're well paid, so that they, as we see within our own denomination, we can end up with thousands of people doing these kind of jobs, which actually are not boots on the ground.
Absolutely.
And the same thing is, we actually need an entrepreneurial economy, a nation of small shopkeepers to generate wealth and to keep democracy local and grounded. But the danger is that we'll end up with a vast. If you go for this eco vision, if you think the bureaucracy and taxation is big now, then you've got a whole new level of pain coming in 10 years' time.
I agree, Daniel. We need to keep an eye on that one. Daniel, we're running out of time here, so we've got some great questions for Question the Rev. So shall we do a bit of this? Here we go. It's a bit of the theme tune here. Daniel, in the absence of us all freezing to death or slipping over on ice because we're wearing sandals, it's time for Question the Rev. We've got some great questions this week, and they're pretty deep ones. And I think I'd like to start now. A lot of people, this has come up a number of times, but I've never addressed it because I've never really wanted to. But this time, I think I'm going to have to, because a number of people have pointed out they want to ask us about evolution. And this person has written, Alexander has written, good name, by the way, name of my youngest child. Is theistic evolution a valid worldview, or is it a squishy compromise to try to marry Genesis and Darwinian theory, failing to satisfy any either camp? And then it just carries on. Sorry, that may sound a tad confrontational, but I've always been of the opinion that Genesis is not the scientific text, but rather a poetic account, essentially resolving the question on a personal level by choosing not to try to reconcile things. My wife has recently become more interested in the subject, and it's coming from the opinion that if we don't take what is written in Scripture as true in its entirety, then the whole thing starts to fall apart. Now, remember, Daniel, I'm sorry to say, this is a quick fire Question the Rev, so we have some more. So we can't have a long excursus on this. So let's as if we would pontificate at length on anything in the show. But what have you got any thoughts about that?
Theistic evolution, that's the idea that God is evolving with the universe.
No. Or I think the
idea that evolution is
something. So evolution is real. The Darwin's theory is real, and it's basically correct. And it's something that God, set up and uses to sort of guide the development of organisms, including human life. And that really the way that you can reconcile the book of Genesis with the theory of evolution is by saying that Genesis is more of a kind of poetical or allegorical account, and evolution is a scientific description of of how organisms came to be how they are, and there's no need to sort of pit them against each other, but they are reconcilable because because they're different genre, they're different ways of explaining the same phenomenon. So something like that, I think.
I would personally say that evolution on the whole is clearly an observable picture of how life on Earth has come about, and that even before that, astronomical data shows that the whole universe started as a singular point. But there have been some thinkers in the past 100 years or so who've tried to push that theologically, like Thiers de Chardin, and say, oh well, that God, our relationship with God is also evolving, and that they do that in a way that denies, I think, it denies the prospect of Christ's return, and that we believe as Christians in the end that history is progressing towards God coming to save us, not us saving ourselves. I suppose you could say that the Darwinian vision shows that the danger is that without human beings, without God, without a partnership with God, ending up in a society of the physically or psychologically strongest claiming to themselves the goods of the world, the survival of the fittest, and that isn't a noble or Christian way to have a meaningful life or civilization. I think the first 3 chapters of Genesis in particular, it's not that they're symbolic. I think they're not asking a scientific question, but they're asking a deeply existential question as to who we are. And if we are made in the image of God, then we cannot be enslaved. We're not meant to be enslaved. We're not the playthings of deities. And likewise, we're not just the whim chance of atomic collisions. But I think it's a massive and important question.
Yeah, it is a massive and important question. And I'm sort of agnostic as to what I think. I'm not really willing to come down on anything. I respect. There are people who are 6 day creationists who I respect as godly people and intellectually very bright, and I'm not willing to dismiss them. But nevertheless, I'm not in a place of knowing enough to really say that I'm very, very skeptical about the some of the claims of Darwinian evolution. There are aspects of its philosophy, or the philosophical implications of it, which, as you say, Daniel, quite rightly, are deeply worrying. And I guess the sort of bottom line for me is there must be some way, and in some ways it's kind of obvious thing to say, but there must be some way in which the empirical reality concerning biological organisms coheres with the scriptural narrative, because the scriptural narrative is true, in whatever way you understand that to be, whether it's an allegorical or a literal truth, or both. That's true, but then there is also a truth about biology as well. So on some level they have to tally. I just personally I just don't really know. I don't really know how that is. Somebody might then say, well, then is that not a problem? Is that not some kind of problem for you, some kind of critical problem? But I really don't think it is, because our faith isn't based on whether or not we've got an excellent answer to that particular question. Our faith is ultimately is founded on Jesus Christ, and he is the center of our faith. how I, just because I don't have a sort of 100% solid gold answer to how I read, Genesis 1-3 vis-a-vis the theory of evolution, it doesn't sort of in any way undermine my faith in Jesus or even my faith in the Bible. It's just a question I haven't really sort of satisfactorily addressed in my own mind. So I think I understand what this person is saying about, well, if you dismiss part of the Bible, that the whole Bible falls apart. And to a certain extent, I do agree with that. I don't think we can just dismiss parts of the Bible and say, well, this is just wrong. I think what we have to say is, well, this is true, but at the moment, I'm not quite sure how I understand how this truth fits in with empirical claims that are the implication of Darwinian theory. So anyway, not really a soundbite there. Let's do another one. This isn't a soundbite either, Daniel, but 2 questions about heaven. So Ben says, as an endurance runner, I have found over the years that the harder the race, the bigger the feeling of satisfaction. In a nutshell, the suffering during the event is proportional to the euphoria experienced at the finish line. In heaven, we are promised no more suffering, and I have difficulty in getting my head around this, considering that certainly some suffering on earth helps provide perspective for joy. Any light you could shed on this would be hugely appreciated. Thanks. And then one more, as if that wasn't complicated enough. Peter says, having a hard time explaining to my daughter how sin entered heaven, i.e., how did the sin of pride and rebellion, which caused Lucifer and his followers to be cast out of heaven, get there? And what's to stop it happening again? Could we end up falling into sin in heaven? Now, Daniel, while I was waiting for you to come online, I did actually do a little bit of research about that second question, because I thought that was really, really interesting. So I'll comment on that first, okay, and then I'll hand it over to you. So just to explain to people, so the scriptural narrative appears to be that God created all the angels before he created the world that we live in with all the human beings in it, and that the angels a certain amount of the angels, some people think a third, sinned and rebelled against God, and that they were led by Lucifer, and they were cast out of heaven, and they became Satan and his legion of demons, who are the sort of spiritual enemies of God. So what Peter's saying is, well, if that was possible in heaven, could it then be possible that some angels in the future will sin? And is it possible that we will sin when we are in heaven, if it's possible, if you like, to sin in the presence of God? What's to stop us sinning in heaven? Now, as I say, I only just spent a few minutes on this, so this isn't going to be the best answer, but I looked in Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologia, because this kind of question he answers. So he makes a distinction between angels in the original state and what he calls beatified angels. So beatified angels are angels who live in heaven in the final state. And beatification for Thomas Aquinas means having attained to the vision of God, which is like the highest point in the life of a created and the existence of a created thing. It's what we mean, I think, when we say going to heaven or being in heaven, attaining to the vision of God, the beatification of an angel or of a human being. So for him, there's a distinction. At the beginning, when you had Lucifer and the angels who sinned against God, it was almost like the angels were in a period of what's the word I'm thinking of? Testing. It's not really the right word. It's the same period that we're in now, where we are, if you like, free to choose God or not to choose God. And at the end of our lives here on earth, how we've made those decisions will determine whether or not we're with God in heaven or whether we're somewhere else. So probation is the word I was looking for. So what Thomas Aquinas thinks is that the angels also had a time of probation as well, and that some of them came through that time of probation by being faithful to God, and that some of them didn't and fell and became demons. Now, Thomas Aquinas asked the question whether a beatified angel can sin. So this is an angel that's come through that time of beatification and has attained to the vision of God. And he says that beatified angels cannot sin. The reason for this is because their beatitude consists in seeing God through his essence. Now, God's essence is the very essence of his goodness. Consequently, the angel beholding God is disposed towards God in the same way as anyone else not seeing God is to the common form of goodness. Now, it is impossible for any man either to will or to do anything except aiming at what good is, or for him to wish to turn away from good precisely as such. Therefore, the beatified angel can neither will nor act except as aiming towards God. Now, whoever wills or acts in this manner cannot sin. Consequently, the beatified angel cannot sin. Now, translated into language people can understand, I think that what he means is that when angels, and by implication human beings, attain to the vision of God, when they're beatified, when we go to heaven and we're in God's presence, we will no longer be able to sin, because we will have such a clear vision of the goodness of God that although we theoretically could sin, we won't, because we know what the good is and we will inevitably choose the good, which goes for angels and human beings. So if you like, there's a kind of parallel between the story of angels and the story of human beings. Angels had a period of probation. They will also have a period of beatification. That may have already happened. I don't think we really know. Human beings have a time of probation. They will have a time of beatification as well. And in that time of beatification, we will no longer be able to sin, whether we're human beings or angels, because we will attain to that vision of God so clearly. So that's what I found out, Daniel. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think I would. I mean, that's brilliant. And do you remember last week when we were talking about the whole trans Cambridge homily went down very badly? How things like looking at what the great and the good, the patristic fathers, Thomas Aquinas, have said. We have these resources here to be able to use them and to access them in a way that we couldn't have done even 10, 20 years ago. And we can get them from the library, from our keyboards, from wherever. And I think that, we can countenance error and address some of these really fantastic big questions by also looking to the scholastics. And usually Aquinas has thought it and got an answer for it, and a deep one too. I think I would add that the church, as the church exists, primarily in heaven, the church surely must have a concern for us here on earth. And if we can say that there is suffering in heaven, it is in the concern and the prayers and the intercessions of the saints for us. They are egging us on, and that they're not just sitting there, on harps on clouds having a nice time for all eternity, but that they are at the heart of that militia, which is the body of Christ, willing us to open the scripture today rather than grab the remote control, to go to church rather than not to be brave, to be kind. They are willing us on with all their heart, with all their energy. And in that sense, there is a kind of suffering in heaven, but it's connected to the suffering of Christ. The heart of the vision of heaven in the book of Revelation is the Lamb who was slain. It is an act of violence. It is the most horrific act. It is the act of violence which puts the whole world right. The death of Christ. And I think that in paradise, if I'm to pick up what Revelation is saying, we come to know and see what Christ has given. And in that humbling, in seeing him as the Lamb of God, in seeing him in what he has done on Good Friday, who can but not be totally restored? And have those words of Thomas, who saw his wounds, my Lord and my God. And so in that respect, I think we're anchored to Calvary's, in the sense that, and the Lamb is at the heart of that wonderful maelstrom, which is the presence of God. It is his total love and gift.
The thing that I just want to just clarify there is, I don't think we're saying that God in any sense continues to suffer the pain of Calvary, because that's clearly, and I would want to distance myself from any kind of suffering God theology, or I don't know what you think about that, Daniel. I mean, it's a big topic, isn't it? But God is, according to sort of classical theism, God is perfect beatitude in himself. And yes, you're absolutely right about that thing about Christ bearing the wounds of Calvary in heaven, but that's done in a way which sort of it's a symbol of total vindication and glory, isn't it? You know, I'm reminded of the verse in the book of Hebrews that says, "For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross." So Christ's suffering Christ's suffering on our behalf is over now. It's finished. It's done. He doesn't continue to suffer. It's been dealt with, and now Christ has been exalted to the right hand of the Father and is enthroned in eternal splendor, and so on and so forth. So I think that's an important thing to stress, that pain and suffering that's Christ underwent on the cross, that kind of pain and suffering is ultimately done away with in heaven. You know, the kind of pain which is violent, pain which comes from that sense of absurdity and pointlessness and unpleasantness, let's say, which we experience in this earth, and Christ certainly experienced on the cross. I think we have to say that there isn't that pain in heaven, but I don't think we have to say that there's no development, that there's no progress, that there's no struggle, that there's no lack for human beings in heaven. I mean, I don't want to say that at all. And I would think of somebody like Gregory of Nyssa, who talked about the Greek word is epiktasis, which is his argument is essentially, because God is infinite, we can never, and the spiritual life is a journey into God. We can never reach the end, but we will always be developing and moving towards God. And when you're moving towards something, it implies that you lack something, doesn't it? Because you're moving from a state of potential into a state of actualization. And I think you can draw an analogy there with development as humans, even with something as prosaic as training for a marathon, or becoming a better musician, or learning a skill, or whatever it is. So I would say there wouldn't be that unpleasant, nasty, absurd, painful, awful type of suffering in heaven, but there could be something that you could call suffering in a different context. I mean, this is a slightly flippant comment, but Conte, the Spurs manager, has this phrase for the style of play that he likes, which he calls sufferball, which doesn't mean like the players don't like playing football. It means that you have to absorb a lot of pressure from the attack as a defensive unit before you counterattack. And that kind of suffering, will there be games in heaven? Will there be winners and losers? Will there be skills that we can learn? Will there be things that we can develop? I think absolutely yes. It's going to be infinitely greater than this world. It's not going to be a diminishment of this world, even if it's difficult to understand.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things, isn't it, that is often miscaricatured, is that we have an existence which is physical, and that the next is somehow a pale reflection of that in some ethereal, Yoda force kind of way that we just platonically dissolve into some sort of state of nothingness.
We'll be like angels playing harps, on clouds, and that's what the eschaton is. But it's not a very inspiring it's not a very inspiring vision of eternity, is it?
I had a harp at my ordination, actually.
Oh, harps! I mean, I don't want to be down on harps. I mean, harps are amazing, aren't they?
Any viewers and listeners who are harp players, we totally affirm you.
Yeah,
Harp
absolutely.
Church of England, we affirm everybody, and we affirm harp players.
Yes, definitely. We're
it's
in
a
favor.
highly skilled venture.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, listen, Daniel, we did have another question on penal substitution atonement, but I think we're going to have to leave that because honestly, I've got deadline, so I've got to go. But for that person who asked that question, somebody in the Telegram has actually dropped a link to my other podcast, Holy CV, where we did an in-depth look at the central theories of the atonement. And the last one we did was penal substitutionary atonement. So I'll put the link to it on the show notes for anyone else who's interested. But if you'd like to check that out, you just listen to that podcast, because that goes into a significant amount of detail about it. It's a good discussion as well. I think it's such an important topic that it probably is best not to try and slotted in at the end of the podcast. I think the one thing I would say, though, having said all that, is that when we think about the cross, when the question is about really, how does the cross save us? I think that the most important thing to recognize is that we don't have to have all the answers, but that we believe that in Christ's death on the cross on our behalf, that our sins are taken care of, they're dealt with, they're washed away, they're washed out of us, and that we can be reconciled to God through Jesus' sacrifice on our behalf, through his broken body, through his shed blood, and ultimately through his vindication in the resurrection and his exaltation to the right hand of the Father. So if it's a real problem for you, I think it's a really important thing to talk about and think through, how exactly does the atonement work? But if it's a problem, if it's a stumbling block, don't worry too much. Fix your eyes on Jesus Christ and his sacrifice on your behalf, and trust in him, and trust in that sacrifice to save you. Because that's really, I think, at the heart of the New Testament message. Why doesn't the New Testament give us the precise answer? Well, we have to trust the wisdom of God, that he supplied what we need in the New Testament, as interesting and important as these questions are. But that's sort of my quick answer, and go to the podcast. Daniel, did you want to add anything to that? Sorry, I don't want to hog the mic there. Okay, cool. Well, let's finish up. Just to say, we appreciate people listening. This episode I've really enjoyed, and I hope other people have as well. There's so many things that we've talked about, and if you enjoyed the episode, do please subscribe to us and put the alert on YouTube, so it will pop up in your notifications when we release a new episode. So subscribe to us, or on your podcast, please do, and please share the episodes on social media. Retweet it on Twitter, or write your own tweet and send it out. And you can email us if you'd like to get in touch, irreverendpod@gmail.com, and you can support the podcast as well. The ways to do that are on our website, irreverendpod.com, but essentially you can support us month by month on Patreon, and we release the episodes early on there, or you can leave us a message on buy me a coffee, and leave a small donation, a one-time donation on there. But all the information for that stuff is on the website. One thing I didn't actually mention, which people may be interested in, is that we have, barring some kind of act of God against it, we are going to be hosting a live event in London on the 4th of February. Daniel will be there, I'll be there, Tom Pelham will be there, and Rod Dreher will be there with us. And we've also, I'm happy to say that we've got a listener who has a fantastic string quartet who will be there providing some incidental music as well, which we're working on confirming, but that's going to happen. So that's really nice. We'll have some nice music there. It's going to be a super event. Tickets are going to go on sale, we hope, next week. So in next week's episode, we will share the link and everything like that. But please do write that in your diaries, and just be aware that those tickets are coming out, that they will be limited. And I just can't wait for this event. I love meeting people who listen to the show.
Great.
Yeah, and it's going to be super. So just to be aware, those tickets are coming. The reason that it's taken a while is we've been waiting for the invoice from the venue, because we need to pay the deposit, and et cetera. And we didn't want to put the tickets out before we confirmed the venue, but it's all happening. So just be aware that Rod Dreher event in person, that's on the 4th of February in London. So don't book anything up for that weekend. Just wait. The tickets are coming. Those are all my notices. Should we finish, Daniel? Do you mind doing a prayer or a blessing or something for us?
Sure. Heavenly Father, as we look to these days and weeks ahead, be with us in all that we do, all that we say. Help us to keep a steadfast faith. Bless our families and our friends. And particularly let us be mindful of the poor, the needy, the homeless, those who are despairing and struggling in these difficult times. And may Almighty God bless us all, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thanks so much, Daniel. And I look forward to being with you again next time. And thank you to all our listeners as well. But until then, it's goodbye from Father Daniel French. And it's goodbye from me. Goodbye.